Well, hello everyone. This is Fadi, and of course, it's been a while since we've done these live streams from our studio. And incidentally, I've been here for a couple of days now doing a lot of recording with our dear brother Jay Smith, who happens to be sitting right next to me. But we also have another wonderful guest joining us remotely, and that's Brother Mel, who is going to be seen on the screen. And I also did a short video series, but really fascinating video series. Of course, the minute we mention Dr. J or Mel, you know we're talking about historical criticism of Islam and the origin of Islam and connections to other sources outside of Islam itself. In the case of Dr. J, we've been going through a huge video series. I think we've recorded closer to 76 episodes, if I recall, or 77 episodes of a series that we called Creating the Quran, based on a book. And Jay, if you want to give me that book for a second, I want people to start thinking about it. This book is called Creating the Quran by Dr. Stephen Shoemaker. Fascinating book, very academic, supports for the most part, many of the things we've been saying about the problem with the standard Islamic narrative. So we encourage all of you to go and get this book, because once the series is released, which is a very long one, it's a record, to be honest, about how long of a video series we've done together for one topic. You are going to enjoy it. You're going to find this book to be fascinating, but the way we expanded on it, it's going to add a lot of more material. I want to welcome all of you, of course, who are joining us right now. I want to welcome our moderators. Thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. As always, speaking to moderators right now, please take control of the comments. Anything that is inappropriate, please send it out. If it doesn't work that way, and you give them a warning, then you can go in and block him. And if I see anything myself, you know what I do with those things. It's blocking, and there is no returning back, because we want to be respectful to our guests. We want to be respectful to everyone with us. This is a short live stream, by the way. It will last about 25 to 30 minutes only. If you have any specific questions based on what you're going to hear, post it for us. We'll do our best to get to it. Jay, thank you again for being here. Why don't you give our viewers just a brief background about what went out, basically what happened, I should say, in relationship to this book?
Yeah, many of you have known that whenever we come out with Mel or any of the sin sifters, when I'm engaging with Al, one of the comebacks that you've always said is, okay, these are great. There's so much new material, but these are white papers. These are what-if scenarios. Where are the authorities? Where are the scholars? Well, good old Stephen Shoemaker put this book together. It just came out in August of last year, in August of 2022. The creating the Quran, and he goes and unpacks the Quran, and he quotes authority after authority after. He looks only at scholarship, looks at the best in the field, and he takes their quotes and he makes his case that the book, the Quran, was not at all put together by man under the auspices of a caliph named Uthman, that more than likely it was created, or the nascent Quran was created during the time of Abd al-Malik and al-Hajjaj at the turn of the 8th century. Was not finalized at that time, because we know all the Qit'at problem that came after that, and then of course all the many different changes that Dan Brubaker has been finding. So what Al and I have been doing is taking these quotes, and we are creating an edifice on the Quran. It's really on the Quran. We're showing that the Quran, the book that the Muslims need, they need to have it. This is that eternal revelation that they claim is anything but eternal. But we're only using quotes from scholars to do that.
Let's hold on a second. It seemed like people cannot hear Jay, folks. I'm talking to the control room. So why don't I just take over here for a second until we fix the audio problem. Mel, why don't we shift over to you? In your case, we did a quick video series related to the connection between Zoroastrianism and Islam. Can you give us some feedback on that, or an overview of that?
Yeah, well, it's not a massive surprise that Zoroastrianism has had an influence on Islam. I'm not the first person to say it. It's been noted by many scholars down through the years. The main things that I've been focusing on were the similarity that you find between Zoroastrianism and Islam. For example, the Zoroastrianism has 5 prayer times, and they match exactly with Islam. There's the wudu, the washing before prayer, and there are lots of other elements that you'll immediately see that are similar. The other big one is the fact that I looked into the origin of the Zamzam name itself, and there was a Chinese source from the middle of the 8th century called Du Huan. He was a prisoner of war, and he mentions a religion called the Zemzem, and I was immediately taken by that name. What is this Zemzem? And it turned out that he was referring to Zoroastrianism. And looking a bit deeper, I discovered that Al-Tabari refers to Zoroastrianism as different versions of the word Zamzam. So even time of Al-Tabari, they're open with the reference to the Zamzam referring to Zoroastrianism. It's not even clear whether there was a reference to the Zamzam well as in the time of Al-Tabari. I can't imagine him using that in relation to Zoroastrianism if the Zamzam well was a practice even at that stage. So there's an awful lot in that. There's also kind of an awful lot of evidence that of polytheism in relation to Islam, in relation to Mecca. So, for example, the obvious one being the Black Stone. St. John of Damascus refers to it as the head of Aphrodite, otherwise known as Venus, which is a goddess, or from a Christian point of view, anything that isn't really God is a demon. So that's kind of quite embarrassing. And then there's actually a god called Zam, which is where Zamzam comes from. So the Zoroastrians refer to a god called Zam. So that's another unfortunate connection. And yeah, so that's kind of like a broad outline of what I'm going to be looking at.
Yeah, and I'll get back to you, circle back to you. Jay, could you just say a word or two? I want to make sure that everybody can hear you.
Can you all hear me now? Just if you could just people right on the screen, if you can hear me coming in loud and clear. If not, well, then we do have a technical problem.
Yes.
Hello, testing.
Yeah,
testing.
so we'll wait for them to respond. I want to respond to a man by the name Arib ibn Yarub. I don't think even you speak Arabic, by the way, but it's funny, you use that, and you're saying, do these guys ever show evidence? Are you living under a rock, by the way, because we show evidence with everything. So obviously you're living under a rock, and we did talk about the many rocks of Islam. So I encourage you to definitely watch that, because you'll be pleasantly surprised that all of the rocks of Islam are nothing but pagan rocks. But Islam rocks, by the way. Islam rocks. Go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, let me just go ahead and say what I mentioned earlier, but you could not hear. One of the difficulties that we're having with, or people are having with what we have been doing, concerns where are the scholars behind all this work that Mel's been putting together, the Sim Sifters have been putting together, that we have unpacked here in the studio over the last really 4 years now? Where is the scholarship? And what Shoemaker has done, this book came out in August of 2022. He did the work for us, and I want to thank Shoemaker. I want to thank Stephen. He did an amazing job, because what he did is what you've been asking. He went to all the scholarship. He went to Wansboro, he went to Crone, he went to Hawting, he went to Hoyland, he went to Neuwirth, Guillaume D, you name it. He has done the work that we need, because we need to have the scholarship behind what we are saying. So though we keep on saying these are white papers, they're much more than white papers. They're moving into the green paper, means these are things that we can pretty much solidify as happened, especially with the Quran. And what he was trying to do, and what we have really pulled out in our series, is that if the Quran was put together, this book here, if it was put together, just take a look, open its pages, and look at the sophistication of the theological disputes. Look and see the enormous amount of stories that are coming from many different sources. These stories don't make sense in a place called Mecca and Medina. There's just no one living down that far south. There are maybe a few hundred people living in Yathrib. We don't know of any place called Mecca. It just doesn't exist. It's not in any map. It's not in any documentation. But even if you were taking it from Yathrib, it is nothing more than a little oasis. in a little oasis, but we don't have any literature. We don't have any people that even know how to read at that time. Therefore, all of the sophisticated material, especially these engagements with Christianity, these engagements with Judaism, there have to be Jews and Christians to have this engagement. There are no Jews, there are no Christians that far south. They're all up in the north. So what here they're saying, and what the scholars are saying, is almost everything we know about this book had come from places of what today would be called Jordan, or Syria, or Iraq. That's where the water is, that's where the civilizations are, and that's where these debates are happening. That's why the Quran had to be written in that type of milieu. But we needed to have the scholarship behind us to say that. Now, what Stephen Shoemaker has done, and that's why we're saying, get this book. It's hot off the press. Look and see what he has done. What the scholars are saying is this book Quran could not have come together, even with the literary discussions in a place called Medina, where a man named Uthman lived. There is no Uthman. There's no reference to anybody called Uthman at all, and certainly not in Medina. Looks like the Quran was put together about maybe 50, 60 years later by a man named Abdul Malik. You know who that man is. He is the caliph that ruled in Damascus, not in Medina, in Damascus. He was an Umayyad caliph from 685 to 705, and his governor al-Hajjaj, he well known that the two of them were the ones that actually collated many of this material to put the Quran together. As you're collating it, remember what Mel just said, as you're collating, you need to go to sources for that collation. Well, who do you think they went? They went to all the people surrounding them. Well, look and see who was surrounding them. Damascus, when it moved into to Baghdad. The people that are surrounding are Zoroastrians, they are Jews, they are Ishmaelites, they are Ethiopians. These are the surrounding nations, and much of the material that they're putting into the Quran are these discussions that are happening between Jews and Christians, between Trinitarians and anti-Trinitarians. This group are anti-Trinitarians. That's why so much of the Quran confronts Jesus, confronts his divinity, confronts the Trinity, confronts his sonship. Look at the inscriptions. They all are these kind of confrontations. That makes sense where this Quran was then put together, and that's why the scholarship is also supporting us. So it's great to have the scholarship behind us. It's great to finally have someone of Dr. Shoemaker, who is in the University of Oregon, who is the one that really has put done the mother load, has done a lot of work for us to make sure the quotes are there to support what we're saying. Back to you.
Wonderful. I mean, I think what we're seeing here, and I'm going to get back to you, Mel, for a second here. What we're seeing from the work of Mel, the work of Dr. J. Smith, and others in the same group, is that we're starting to discover that the northern hypothesis that Islam came from the north is real. Even Dr. Shoemaker alludes to that. He does affirm that there is something about the north where many things have been borrowed or at least migrated south. Of course, the question becomes now, how can we, like I stated to you before, when it comes to the Quran, it's probably easy to spot that. When it comes to some of the rituals and even locations, geographical locations, easy. Still the question about Muhammad himself, that's been a number of theories out there. Mel came up with some, I think Paul, Alice, and a couple of others. So Mel, would you like to elaborate a little bit on that? And then I'll let Jay answer this.
Yeah, it's a really difficult one to narrow down the true Muhammad of history. If there was a person, he certainly wasn't anyone connected to Mecca. The source that we have of St. Thomas the Presbyter gives us a date of 634 of a person called Muhammad of the Tayyaye. So that's 2 years after the standard Islamic narrative has him supposedly dying, but it presents him as just starting out, really. And that ties in with Umar's reign. So it looks very much like it could be Umar that is the Muhammad of the standard Islamic narrative, which throws everything out. It makes you wonder how much of the traditions, the Islamic traditions, you can actually trust. At this stage, I trust very little of the traditions, whether it be the Hadiths or the Sirah. And it's just a shame that there weren't better historical records kept. And there, even in terms of the records that we do have, there are an awful lot of contradictions between them. I was in discussion with AJ Juice there recently by email, and one piece of advice he gave me, which is still ringing on my ear, is he says, do not trust the sources, because he's seen so much more than I have, and he's found again and again that these sources cannot be trusted. So even with sources that we think are reliable, you have no idea the levels that the Ottomans and the Abbasids have done to hide the past and create a narrative that suits their current agendas,
Right. And MJ, I mean, I know you're passionate about this particular topic, and that's why I wanted to raise it a little bit. Now, in all seriousness, I mean, you and I have heard at least the theories about the possible origin of either Muhammad or, let's say, a prophet. Have you found a way so far to reconcile that?
Yes, absolutely. And this is why it's so good what Mel said. Take that one step further. Hoyland, in his book on Islam as others saw it, even the word Islam, he puts Islam out there without thinking. There is no Islam in any of the documentation that he forwards. There are no people called Muslims in any of the documentation he forwards. He introduces Muslims. He introduces Islam so that we understand what he's talking about. And then he goes, and what Hoyland did, he did a great job for us in 1999 by going and looking at all the documentation that does exist in the 7th century. And remember, one thing we have always asked, show us from the 7th century who this man is. Show us from the 7th century where this book is, and show us from the 7th century where this city is, the book, the man, and the place. Look and see what these people are saying. Even if you want to take them and say, dispute them, let's don't dispute them, let's take them on face value. Let's do what Hoyland did, and let's look at Thomas the Presbyter. Let's look at John of Nicaea. Let's look at the Doctrina Iacobi. Let's look at the writings of Sabaeus. Take a look at every one of their writings, and they're writing in 634, they're writing in 660, 661, writing in 670. This is the mid to late 7th century. They are obviously being confronted by these Arabs. They are Arabs, and they are part of, but listen what they call them. They call them Ishmaelites. They call them Hagarenes because they're in the line of Hagar through Ishmael. They call them Saracens. That's the Greek name for these Arabs. They call them Mahagres. Mahagre means people of Hagar. Again, that's another nomenclature for the people of Hagar. And they call them Muhajiruns.
Muhajiruns is like
people who are on exodus, nomadic. These are nomads.
Exactly.
So nowhere is there any people called Muslim. But even look at when they do refer to Muhammad, like Thomas the Presbyter. Notice what they say about him. He's up in Jerusalem. He's over in Gaza. He's up in Damascus. He's way over in what we now know today as Baghdad. At that time, it was Ctesiphon. These are all in the north. And he doesn't refer to himself as a prophet. He doesn't refer not one does this character, whatever his name is. Remember, Muhammad means the praised one. Whoever this praised one is, in this case, you can see he is a conqueror. He is a warrior. He's coming with a sword. The Doctrina Iacobi is very clear that he's coming with a sword. Be careful of him. Of course, they would need to be careful of him, but nowhere does he come with the Quran. There's no reference to any book that he has. There's no reference to any people that he represents other than he represents the Tayyiye. Look on the map and see where the Tayyiye are. That is in Iraq. So you can see on almost every one of these cases, whoever this Muhammad, this praised one is, look at the coin with Muhammad's name on it. It's there on the coin with the caliph holding a cross and has a cross above his head, and there's Muhammad over to the side. Well, that Muhammad, that praised one is not at all anybody living in Mecca, Medina. He's certainly not a Muslim. If anything, he's a Christian. So I would even suggest that this Muhammad is probably Jesus Christ in that case.
Abu Bakr Osman, I can see your comments. Praise the Lord that you have left Islam. I pray that you have come to know Christ. You can reach me, by the way, directly. You can go just to my website, sirainternational.com. Email me and we'll find a way to connect, okay? So thank you for making our day. Now, here is where I'm coming from, folks. And again, I'll be back again to you, Mel, to comment on this. We are starting to notice a lot of things that are coming from the north. For instance, the direction of the Qibla points to north, okay? Whether you want to say Petra, when you say Jerusalem, it doesn't matter. It points north, okay? Number one. Number two, many of the rituals that I am familiar with in Mecca, like the Safa, the Marwa, for instance, come from north. You talked about the Black Rock, Mel, and there is a possibility that it comes basically from a Zoroastrian practice or religion. Its connection to Satan or sin, technically speaking, stoning the pillars where Satan allegedly tried to persuade Abraham, for instance, when he wanted to sacrifice his son. We find this north. You can make a case that most of the common qira'at or the rawis of these qira'at basically are concentrated north. You find that two of the major Islamic empires, basically, or caliphate, the Umayyads and the Abbasites, north. And then you find also the progenitors of the Hadith and the Sirah and many other come from north. What a coincidence. Yet Islam started in Mecca and Medina.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, and this is fascinating because we talked about this earlier today, that Stephen Shoemaker still, even he still wants to believe that there may be a Muhammad from Mecca. After he spends 5 pages shutting down Mecca, shutting down the Hijaz, the very next paragraph says, but however, the Quran, possibly the orality of the Quran must have come from a man named Muhammad living in the very same place that he's just eradicated. And that is a knee-jerk reaction that scholars have to get beyond. They need to go beyond this and stop contradicting himself. It was almost like a slap in the face when I read that, and I had to laugh. I said, I can't believe he's still giving lip service to Mecca and Medina. None of the other scholars are. Patricia Corona was very clear on this. You cannot, listen, she wrote a whole book on it in 1987, Meccan Trade and the Rise of Islam, eradicated any notion that there could be any place called Mecca or that there could be any man from that place. Now, she got a death threat for writing that book by the Muslims there in Oxford University, had to move to Cambridge University, where she then finally was headhunted by Princeton, because she is the only one that is going back to the original sources and getting it from the languages that exist, because she reads and writes 15 languages. Amazing mind. And it's these scholars that we're just taking their material and we're just coming to conclusions on it. But one thing that we have to be careful of is that when Muslims keep on coming back at us and just keep reiterating, yes, but you're not making up my mind for me. My mind's already made up. I don't have a problem with the traditions. We need to ask, where are those traditions? Where are they written? See, Muslims aren't aware that everything they're dependent on is not from the 7th century, it's not from the 8th century, it's from the 9th and 10th century, and we're not even sure it's from the 9th and 10th century now, right, after what we've now found about the Sirah and what we now found about the Hadith.
So that's what we see, north and later.
Too far north and too far removed.
Mel, in terms of your research, what else can you tell us about the direction you're taking? I mean, can you summarize at least in a couple of words, or at least a few minutes, if you're seeing the same thing we're seeing, technically speaking, the north thesis or hypothesis?
Absolutely. There's no way I can't even imagine a source from way down in Mecca, because every single piece of evidence that I come across keeps reiterating the same point. So you could take out a map of the Fertile Crescent and basically draw lines across it, and you'd find that all the connections link with there. So there's no way you can justify the Islamic narrative if you're being honest. I think, unfortunately, an awful lot of Muslims have got blinkers on, and they can't see the evidence right in front of their face. And they split hairs about minor things, but they don't see the big picture. So essentially every type of tool that I've used in terms of evidence, whether it be art, whether it be coins, whether it be documentation, you name it, sources, they all say the same story, which is it's all up in the north. I think what the latest thing that I'm looking at is looking at the Persian influence, and that I think really tells stage 2. I think the Umayyad Abbasid, the early Abbasid period, is really stage 1, which is the period that Shoemaker is looking at. But I think stage 2 is fascinating because that's where all the weird stuff starts to enter into Islam. So you have all of the weird stories of Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old and so on. Well, right. If the Chinese source is correct, that the Zemzem were kind of sexually debauched at that time, you can understand why that's the fascination. And like, if you read the Hadiths, you kind of go away with the impression that they're lampooning the Arabs. You can't even take the story seriously. If you kind of start hearing it almost sounds hilarious, the tone behind the stories, because it's so far-fetched and so disconnected with reality that it's very hard to take it seriously. But unfortunately, I think a lot of Muslims haven't really bothered to read many of the Hadiths. They're hearing it secondhand, usually through their imams who kind of leave out the some of the contradictions and just give them a story that seems to add up. But I think if they were to do their own homework, I think they'd find tons of contradictions in those stories.
Yeah, yeah. Well, why am I not surprised, by the fact that they only let others tell them what they should believe? So, Mil, we have about 5 minutes left. In about a minute or so, are you at liberty to tell us about the type of research you're working on right now?
Well, it changes from day to day, to be honest with you. One of the things I've been collaborating with different people, and so kind of I suppose the way I'm currently looking at things is I'm collaborating with some who are looking at the Jewish sources. I'm collaborating with, for example, Lloyd de Jong in terms of the Gnostic connections, and this is quite fascinating. It's quite helpful as a kind of way of seeing what's happening with the Zoroastrian connections, because what I'm seeing is that there's multiple layers going on, and we sometimes see the veneer on top, and it's usually stories about Ishmael and Hagar. But when you cut underneath the veneer, you find a lot of paganism underneath, and it's almost like they have one story for the outside world saying, it's all very Judeo-Christian, but actually when you go down under it, you find just hardcore paganism at the heart of it, with a totally different set of meanings behind everything. So I think we have to be increasingly skeptical about the stories that are presented to the world. I think the more we start making connections and start seeing the patterns, I think one of the areas that I'd like to kind of go into in the future is look at how all the different religions around the Middle East have influenced Islam. So one of the areas I think that needs to be explored more is Mithraism, which is the religion that is associated with the House of Karen. I think the other one would be Manichaeism. I think that was something that I dealt with Bala, an Indian scholar, a number of years ago, and that threw up a lot of interesting sources of influence on Islam. So I think that's probably where I'm heading in the weeks and months ahead, which is just looking at all the different influences. It's very hard to collate it all together, but it certainly builds up a picture. And then I suppose it's all about trying to sew together and see the historical progression over the first 2 or 3 centuries.
Well, thank you so much for sharing this, Jay. What about you? Where is your research taking you?
The research has taken me to the Quran. That's why we've done these 76 episodes. It's going to take a good whole year to get these episodes up and obviously onto the internet so people can see them. Meanwhile, what I'm more interested in is looking and see the sequence how the Quran was put together. I think we can pretty well know now that much of the Quran was probably beginning to collate, trying to be introduced in the 8th century. It was then, of course, then you had all the Qira'at problem from the 8th, 9th up until the 10th century. That then did not really come to fruition until the 15th century, 1429, and then of course after that with the 30 different qira'ats, which caused such a furore when that our good old friend 5'2" Hatun exposed it to the whole world, caused such an enormous embarrassment for Muhammad Hijab, who was in the crowd there, having to do that interview with Yasser Qadi, which absolutely destroyed the preservation of the Quran. Once that preservation is shut down, we're now going to be moving into Dan Brubaker's material. And Dan Brubaker is coming out with another book that goes way beyond the 20 examples. He's going to be publishing one because he has over 4,000 of these. Meanwhile, I'm going back with Dan Gibson. In the next following weeks, I'll be doing a whole series with Dan Gibson's brand new book. Let the rocks speak. If we're not going to speak, the rocks are going to speak for us. He's come up with a brand new book where he's shutting down all of the attacks that have been against him, all the different questions. He's now responding to every one of those questions. I've already been given the book. I'm going through it right now. We're starting next week to start the recordings. We're going to go public with that so the whole world can see that there's an enormous amount of problems that Muslims haven't even dealt with. So these are the projects I'm working with. But at the same time, I'm going to continue working with you, Al Fadi, because because, well, I said, we're symbiotic. We kind of work together well. We've had so many different episodes. How many different series have we done? And now we've just broken all records with this series. The Quran has an awful lot yet to get out there. It seems that the Quran really does catch people's attention. Look at this video you just put out earlier. Not even one day now. It's only
Right,
been
I
up
was
about
going to
23
mention
hours,
that, yes.
and already it looks like it's going to go over 20,000 views. And we're just talking about what Hatun found. Something as simple as that. If a 5'2" woman can do that much damage to the Quran, can you imagine what the rest of us can do, taking what she's saying and moving it beyond, shutting down these goalposts and really pushing against this book called the Quran. So most of my energies will be against this book in the upcoming next few months.
Wonderful. And thank you, Brother Mel, of course, for your work. And I want to give just a shout out to Sister Nada Verse. Praise the Lord that you are doing fine. We've tried to reach out to you many times, but didn't know if you were receiving our messages or not. But looks like you are doing well. Praise the Lord. Wonderful moderator, of course, and she is very helpful in many areas. Of course, I don't want to reveal a whole lot of details about what she does. But all that to say is the Lord is good. Thank you to both of you. Thank you, Dr. J. Thank you, Mel. And I really mean it. We need to continue doing these collaborations and doing even panel discussions like this, lively ones, because it's for the benefit of everyone. And I want to thank those of you who took the time to join us right now. And I want to encourage you, whether you're watching us live or later, to consider becoming a part of our Patreon team. And we are so thankful for your partnership and your sacrifices. Reach out to me with any questions. Hopefully, you are going to enjoy the series that we have been releasing. Jay mentioned about this just recent video about Sister Hatun, and it's doing marvelous. It's amazing. I've never seen any video that went this vibrant in just a span of 24 hours. And we praise God for that, of course. We do everything to the glory of our Lord. The new series that will be released soon will deal with this new book. Give me the book again, if you don't mind, Jay, so to show people. It's called Creating the Quran by Dr. Stephen Shoemaker. And I am really hoping and praying, and Sister Nada, that's where you come in handy. I would like to reach out to him and see if he would be willing to do a live stream with me or join me and Jay on a live stream. We would love really to hear from him. We have a lot of questions that it will be very helpful if he can clarify them for us. Thank you, Mel. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, everyone. This is Al Fadi over and out. God bless. Take care.